At 6 o'clock on a chilly October morning in 2024, two men I'd never seen before started hammering on my front door like they were serving a warrant on a meth lab. I opened it in my bathrobe and coffee still in my hand, and there they were. Cheap polyester uniforms, plastic badges catching the porch light, and the unmistakable smell of last night's bourbon on their breath. Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, the heavier one announced, waving a clipboard like it was the Constitution. $2,000 cash bail, right now, or you're leaving in cuffs. Unauthorized fencing, Section 14C. You've had your warnings. His partner already had handcuffs out, swinging them in little circles. Real steel cuffs, I noticed. Not the toy kind. I didn't say a word. Just leaned against the doorframe and let them run their mouths. Because what they didn't know yet was that my name is Jack Brennan, and for 15 years I was chief of police for every square mile of this county, including the one they were standing on. I retired the day we buried my wife Ellen. 6 months of silence, grief, and trying to figure out how to live in a house that suddenly felt 3 sizes too big. I thought Willow Creek Estates in Central Virginia would be quiet. A place to plant roses and let the days blur together. I was wrong. 3 months earlier I'd closed on the little brick ranch on Sycamore Lane. The backyard was nothing special, just patchy grass and a rusted chain-link fence, but it got good morning sun. Ellen had always wanted a real rose garden. I spent every weekend for a month digging beds, amending the red clay with compost and peat, planting heritage varieties she used to circle in catalogs. Monsieur Tillier, Maggie, New Dawn. When the old fence started sagging into the roses, I replaced it with 6-foot cedar panels. Clean lines, no maintenance, and it gave the garden the privacy Ellen would have loved. I even jumped through every hoop the old HOA required, got signatures, paid the $25 review fee, kept the approval letter in my kitchen drawer. Then Valerie Hargrove arrived. Valerie rolls up in a pearl-white Cadillac Escalade with vanity plates that read Queen V. She stepped out in heels sharp enough to stake a vampire, clutching a 3-ring binder the size of a phone book. 49 pages of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. She smiled the way a cat smiles at a canary with a broken wing. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she purred. "I'm Valerie Hargrove, president of the Architectural Review Board. We need to talk about your unauthorized modification." I handed her the approval letter. She glanced at it like it was written in crayon. "Previous administration," she said, waving a manicured hand. "Standards have evolved. Your fence disrupts sight lines and depresses property values. You have 72 hours to remove it or fines begin accruing at $50 per day." I asked to see the current bylaw that superseded my approval. She told me the documents were in committee review and weren't public yet. Then she climbed back into her Escalade and left a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and Menace hanging in my driveway. That night Frank Delaney came over with a 6-pack and 25 years of neighborhood gossip. Frank's a retired electrician with hands like lumber and a voice like gravel soaked in bourbon. We sat on my back porch watching the roses catch the last light. "Jack, you just painted a bullseye on your chest," he said. "Valerie and her husband Carl have been running this place like a protection racket. They pick the soft targets. Widows, single moms, anybody who looks like they won't fight back." He told me about Ruth O'Connor next door, 81 years old, still grieving her husband George who dropped dead of a heart attack 2 years ago after fighting Valerie's fines for 18 straight months. Ruth had already paid them $9,000 in aesthetic non-compliance fees, just to keep them off her porch. He told me about Maria Santos, the young nurse on Pine Street raising 2 kids alone, threatened with child services because her plastic playhouse was 2 inches too close to the property line. He told me about the Patels, who received a violation for flying an American flag that was not on the approved mounting bracket list. And every story ended the same way. "Pay, or we make your life hell." I spent 30 years putting handcuffs on men who thought fear was power. I wasn't about to start writing checks to a suburban mafia with a clipboard. So I started doing what I'd done for 3 decades. I investigated. County records showed the Willow Creek HOA had never filed proper nonprofit paperwork after 2019. The bank accounts were a shell game. Checks written to Carl's landscape consulting company for work neighbors swore never happened. Valerie signing herself administrative stipends that would make a congressman blush. One midnight, my security cameras caught Carl in my backyard with a crowbar, prying cedar boards loose. 2 nights later, the same cameras recorded him splashing gasoline along Ellen's rose beds and flicking a lighter. I was through the back door before the first flame caught, badge clipped to my belt, Glock in my hand, shouting the same words I'd used on armed robbers. "Police! Drop it and get on the ground." Carl dropped the can and ran like a track star. Half the roses were blackened skeletons by the time the fire department arrived. I stood there in the smoke and ash and felt something inside me snap clean in two. That garden was the only place Ellen still felt close. They had just burned the last piece of her I had left. The next morning I called a friend still active in the department and asked for a favor, run Carl Munson's sheet. What came back made my jaw clench. Suspended contractor's license in 2 states, outstanding warrants for theft by deception, and a domestic violence restraining order Valerie had taken out and then mysteriously dropped. The man was a walking felony. Frank put me in touch with the underground. 6 neighbors meeting in Ruth's basement, whispering over folders thick with threatening letters. Ruth's hands shook as she handed me a banker's box. "My George kept everything," she said. "He told me one day someone would know what to do with it." George O'Connor had been the HOA treasurer for 36 years. Inside that box were originals of every shady vote, every forged quorum, every check Valerie and Carl had written themselves going back a decade. George had even kept a journal. The last entry, written 2 days before his fatal heart attack, read, "If they come for Ruth after I'm gone, give this to someone who still believes in the law." I took George's box, our own mountain of evidence, and drove to the FBI resident agency in Richmond. Special Agent Carla Lopez spent one afternoon reading and looked up with the kind of smile cops save for Christmas morning. "Chief Brennan," she said, "you didn't just bring me an HOA dispute. You brought me a RICO enterprise with elder abuse, mail fraud, wire fraud, and civil rights violations sprinkled on top. Give me 30 days. We gave her 21. Valerie scheduled what she called Community Compliance Restoration Day for the first Monday in November. She wanted spectacle. She sent flyers threatening mass arrests for chronic violators. She hired 2 extra goons who looked like they moonlighted as bouncers at the kind of bars that still have sawdust on the floor. Monday dawned cold and bright. At 7:55 a.m., Valerie rolled down Sycamore Lane like a one-woman parade, black judge's robe over her suit, wooden gavel in one hand, bullhorn in the other. Carl strutted beside her in a rented police uniform complete with fake sergeant stripes and a duty belt that sagged under the weight of his gut. The 2 hired thugs brought up the rear. Their first stop, Ruth O'Connor's front door. I watched on my phone from the live feeds neighbors had set up. Valerie pounded with the gavel. Ruth opened the door in her housecoat, oxygen tubing trailing behind her. "Ruth O'Connor," Valerie boomed through the bullhorn. "You are hereby remanded into custody for conspiracy to undermine lawful community governance and chronic aesthetic terrorism." Carl grabbed Ruth's thin wrist and snapped on cuffs. Ruth cried out as the metal bit into her skin. That was all we needed. Every door on the street opened at once. 27 families stepped into the cold morning light. Phones went up. Teenagers live-streamed to 3 platforms. Frank walked out carrying George's ledger like it was the tablets from Sinai. I came down my front walk in my dress blues, the ones I wore to Ellen's funeral. Real badge. Real gun. Real authority for the first time in 6 months. "Carl Munson," I called, voice carrying the way it used to over a chaotic crime scene. "Step away from Mrs. O'Connor. You are under arrest for felony assault on an elderly person, false imprisonment, impersonating a peace officer, and about 40 other charges we'll get to." Valerie started screaming about private property rights and lawful governance. Carl's face went the color of spoiled milk. Then the cavalry arrived. 3 black SUVs with federal plates screeched in from both ends of the street. Agent Lopez stepped out in an FBI raid jacket, warrant in hand, backed by 12 more agents and 2 deputy U.S. Marshals. Real handcuffs replaced the ones on Ruth's wrists. Carl's knees buckled so badly the deputies had to hold him up. Valerie's judge robe tangled around her legs as they folded her into the back of a cruiser. One of the hired thugs tried to run and made it exactly 4 steps before eating asphalt. Agent Lopez read the charges loud enough for every phone to record: racketeering, conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, elder abuse, civil rights violations under color of law. Minimum 20 years each, federal time, no parole. 6 months later the forfeiture checks came. Ruth received $21,000 plus punitive damages. Maria Santos got enough to pay off her late husband's medical bills and start college funds. Every family that had ever paid a dime got made whole, and then some. Valerie drew 24 years. Carl took 18 and will still be writing restitution checks when he's 80. Willow Creek held an emergency election. Frank Delaney won president with 92% of the vote. New bylaws. Maximum fine $25. Public vote required. Full financial disclosure every quarter. Ruth turned George's basement into a community archive that's already helped 4 other neighborhoods clean house. Ellen's rose garden is twice its original size now. On warm evenings the whole block gathers there. Kids chasing fireflies between the beds while the grown-ups sit on the benches I built and talk about everything except fear. Some nights I sit alone after they've all gone home, and the scent of the roses drifts over me like Ellen's hand on my shoulder. Justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it just takes a street full of ordinary people who finally decide they've had enough. I still think about that morning every single day. When is it right to stand by, and when is it right to stand up? When does turning the other cheek become cowardice? I'd love to know where you draw the line. Drop your story in the comments. Tell me the moment you decided enough was enough, or tell me why you think peace is worth any price. I read every single one.